Hello Year 3s and welcome to your next flipped classroom video. In today's video, we will be looking at, just briefly looking at how fossils are formed. This week in science, we will be looking in a little bit more depth into how fossils are formed, but I thought it would be nice in our flipped classroom video just to introduce it to you so that when we come to our lesson, that you can share some of the information that I have shared with you today. There are a few words that you need to remember when we are looking at our flipped classroom today. So they are organism, sediment, paleontologist, and extinct. Now, these are the really important words to remember when we are talking about fossils being formed. So the first one is organism. Organism. And an organism is a living thing like an animal or a plant. Sediment we have spoken about previously, and sediment is loose materials that settle and form layers of new rock. And remember, we spoke about these being sedimentary rocks. So the word is sediment. Sediment. The next word is paleontologist, and a paleontologist, is a scientist who studies the ancient past. When you go to university, you can learn how to become a paleontologist. And these are the people that dig up bones, dig up fossils, look at things from the past and help us to learn more about them. So the word is paleontologist. Paleontologist. And the last word to keep in mind is the word extinct. Say it with me, extinct. Extinct. Now, if something is extinct, it has no living examples of it left on Earth. There are none of them left, and there are none left alive. So you can have plants that are extinct, you can have animals that are extinct. So they are things that used to be alive at some point, but there is not one single example of it left on the Earth. So before we actually discuss how a fossil is formed, we need to know what a fossil is. So fossils are the stone remains of animals or plants that once were living, okay? Fossils are at least 10,000 years old. And if we think about dinosaurs and the fossils that they had, the dinosaurs became extinct over 65 million years ago. So the things that we are left with, the fossils that we are left with, are not actually the bones of the animal. They are, just as it said, the stone remains. And when we go into depth of how a fossil is formed, you will see why it is the stone remains of the animal. So fossils are formed when an organism dies. So an animal or a plant dies, and this is then covered with sediment. Over millions of years, the shape of the organism is preserved in the rock. And then fossils are important to paleontologists because they give us clues about how organisms that lived they give us clues about organisms that lived many years ago and many of which now are extinct and we no longer have. So this drawing at the bottom of this picture will explain to you how a fossil is formed. So in the first one, we can see there's a little dinosaur there, and it says first the organism dies, okay? This organism is then covered in layers of sediment, and this needs to happen soon after the organism's death or no fossil will be formed. Over millions of years, the sediment compresses, which means to push down, and forms new layers of sedimentary rock. The shape of that organism, the shape of the dinosaur, the shape of the plant, creates a shape in the rock. And the organisms might decay, which means break down and not dissolve, but they break down completely. And you're left with a hole or a mold of that organism, so that plant or that animal. Then the rock is broken down either naturally or deliberately. So that hole then fills with the sediment and we have the shape of our dinosaur. So we can see that what we're left with, just as we mentioned before, is actually the rock shape, the shape of what was left, but obviously made out of rocks and filled with minerals from many, many years of the sediment layering on top of each other, and then the animal or the plant decaying, and then that hole or that shape, that mold being left, and that's filled with various minerals. So that is how a fossil is formed. What I would like you to do is, can you draw me some pictures of each stage of a fossil being formed, and come and show them to me when you have finished.